Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Ben, and this is a 2019 Gibson USA Firebird, one of the last ones ever made. Let's get into it. Well, welcome back, everyone. Today I'm looking at this. This is the 2019 Gibson USA Firebird, one of the last ones ever made. And as you probably know, Gibson stopped production on these models sometime around 2020. A few of them probably crept into about 2021, but really, they haven't made these in going on, what, about 4 years now. Well, I kind of went over the history of the Firebird when I did my review of the Epiphone inspired by Gibson 1963 Firebird V a few months ago. I'll put a link to that review right here. But if you don't have time to watch that video, or maybe you don't care to watch that video, the real quick summary of that story is basically that Gibson was getting beaten everywhere by Fender Stratocaster, and the CEO of Gibson, which was Ted McCarty at the time, was so tired of Leo Fender going out there and just constantly berating Gibson as being like old dogs. They never come out with anything new. And he just wanted to come up with a few designs that could really shut up Leo Fender. So he got together a team of people and they came out with 3 designs: the Explorer, the Flying V, and the Modern. Of course, the Modern was never actually released, or that's the common thought anyway. Maybe they made one prototype. But anyway, the Flying V and the Explorer, while they were radical in design, shortly kind of fell off, and they didn't really sell a bunch of those. So then Ted recruited Ray Dietrich, who was then a very famous automotive designer, probably most known for the checker cab, to come in and design a Gibson guitar. And of course he said, you can have carte blanche, do whatever you want, we just need to make something that Fender cannot make. Now, one thing I find really interesting about the Firebird, and I've always thought this, was that it was just kind of like the same thing as an Explorer, but with the exaggerated points rounded off on nearly all corners. And you know, of course, if you look at this design and you put an Explorer right here, well, you could probably see where I'm coming from. But anyway, yes, Ray Dietrich's got credit for designing this guitar, and of course he does have his special touch on it. Now, I haven't been able to research enough to see if the fact that it's got these juts in the body design here, if that was part of Ray's original design, or if that was maybe just an outcome of having this guitar be a neck-through design with the wings glued on. But I think you can attribute some certain designs to him, and one of them would be the knob placement. And I've always been amazed on this guitar, because if somebody said, hey, you need to put a volume and tone control for each of these pickups on the guitar, I would probably either do what's on a Les Paul and have sort of like a offset diamond design, or maybe just a square of the 4 controls, but it would never once cross my mind to place these 3 in sort of a squarish pattern and then for whatever reason offset this one this way, because why would you do that? But I have to admit, it just looks natural on this guitar. It looks like it belongs like that, and I guess that's why he's a great designer, and I'm sitting on my couch talking about his designs. Now, originally there were 4 different designations of the Firebird guitars. You had the Firebird 1, the Firebird 3, the Firebird 5, and the Firebird 7. Now, the Firebird 1 pretty simply was just a single pickup Firebird with 1 set of volume and tone controls. Then you had the Firebird 3, which was 2 pickups, 2 sets of controls, but it was lacking some of the appointments that you found on the upper models. So it had like dot inlays and no binding. Then you get to the Firebird 5 design and you start to get some of those nicer appointments. So now you've got your 2 pickups, your 2 sets of controls, but you've got your trapezoid inlays and your binding on the neck. And then you get to the Firebird 7, which was sort of like the cream of the crop of the Firebird models. Even though you still had 2 sets of controls down here, you now had 3 pickups, and then you also had split block inlays. Now, the Firebird 1, 3, and 5 models had rosewood fretboards, but the Firebird 7 model had a ebony fretboard, which also put it a step ahead of the other models. Now, this model is the latest and last iteration of the Firebird 5 designation, in that you've got your 2 pickups, your 2 sets of controls, but you've got your trapezoid inlays and your binding on the side. Now, there was a story I ran across from 2021 where somebody asks Matt Kaler of Gibson, hey, is it true that you guys are discontinuing the Firebird? Now, at the time, he says, yeah, we're going to discontinue it for now until we can figure out a way to retool and make the Firebird just an easier guitar to make. Because as it stands right now, it's one of the more difficult guitars for Gibson to make. And the fact that it's got this neck-through design, not to mention it's 6 or 7 inches longer than any of their other guitars, and that just takes up more space in the factory. And he says even this model right here that I'm holding actually has some of those retooling designs to make it easier to manufacture. But yes, according to him, the design is discontinued and it would be coming back in a few years. Now, this is 2024, and the model has really not made any appearance yet, short of the custom shop and, you know, a significantly higher price tag than what this went for. So I think we're all still kind of waiting on that, but who knows what the demand is right now. Obviously, Gibson's releasing new models all the time now. You've got your Gibson Victory, and they've got the Theodore that came out earlier this year, so they're doing something. Is a new Firebird in the works? I'm not sure. Anyway, let's get into this guitar, and I'll mention any of those cost-cutting measures that I was just referring to as they come up in this review. Now, I've always really liked the way that the Firebird looks, and I was not surprised at all when I found out that it had something to do with an automotive designer, especially when you see these that have the giant vibrola plate there with the word Gibson etched into it. It just looks like that design era from the 50s or 60s, all the metal, all the vibrant colors. It's a very cool look for sure. Now, if this design wasn't enough, you've also got this really cool chrome block here of the stop bar, the tunematic bridge, your metal pickup rings housing your Firebird pickups there. Now, of course, I learned my lesson on my last Firebird review. I was referring to them as mini humbuckers, just copying what Gibson had said about them. But yeah, people still write comments to this day that say, you know, there's a difference between Firebird pickups and mini humbuckers. All I have to say about that is Gibson's words, not mine. Now, we will talk about that in a little bit here because I have an interesting story regarding that. Well, maybe not too interesting, but it was interesting to me. Now, of course, you put this chrome block against this really vibrant color. This is one of two options available for 2019. This is Cardinal Red, and the other option was Vintage Sunburst. Now, a fun factoid is both of those colors were also available when the model was released in 1963 as part of the custom color set. And that's another thing that really pissed off Leo Fender, because up until the release of this guitar, Gibson was known for doing more wood grain finishes. You know, you've got your Sunburst, you've got your Vintage Cherry. I'm sure at the time it was probably just Cherry. You've got your ebonies and your solid colors, and they weren't really doing anything crazy like this. Now, in my previous Epiphone review, I mentioned that I paid about $1,500 for this guitar. Well, I actually dug up the receipts, and it's a lot crazier than that. I actually paid $1,180 for this guitar brand new on clearance. And that might go a long way to explaining why Gibson eventually discontinued this model, because the retail price on it was about $2,000. So that's a significant savings. Now, if you want to find this guitar in the used market, I'd expect to pay about $2,500 in this condition, which I would consider mint, meaning there's no scratches, no nicks, there's no defects or damage. Everything's original on it. Now, here is the case in all of its giganticness. It's taller, wider, and about 6 inches longer than a Les Paul case. Of course, it's this giant rectangle, but it provides an amazing protection for this guitar. You see the Gibson logo here on the front of the faux brown leather box. Inside, we've got a plush red interior, very soft and perfectly contoured for this guitar. Under the neck rest here, we've got a giant pocket big enough to keep legal-sized documents in there without bending them. We've also got the Gibson goodie bag in here, and inside that, let's see, the inspection sheet, owner's manual, warranty card, the much-missed Gibson baby photo, a Gibson polishing cloth, a Gibson strap, a Gibson multi-tool, and the original price tag of $1,999. Now, one of the most distinctive features of the Gibson Firebird, of course, is the neck-through design. Now, if you're not familiar with what that means, is basically it's one piece of wood from the bottom of the body here, going up this block here where these juts are, through the neck all the way up to the top here, meaning that the neck folds right into that piece of wood. It's all one solid piece. Well, actually, technically, it's 9 different pieces that are glued together to make that giant piece. And what it is, you've got a piece of mahogany here that's about 1.5 inches. Then it goes to a thin strip of walnut. Then you've got another piece of mahogany that's just a little bit shy of 1/4 inch. Another strip of walnut. Then another piece of mahogany that's about 3/4 inch thick. Strip of walnut. That small 1/4 inch piece of mahogany again. Another strip of walnut. And then lastly, another 1.5-inch-ish piece of mahogany, totaling for 9 different plies. Now they put those all together, and that's what creates this giant center block. And then these 2 side wings here are mahogany, and those are glued to this center block. I'm pretty sure most of you knew that, but if you didn't, or maybe you're looking into Firebirds and want to research them, that's really what's going on here, and that's what makes this guitar really unique amongst Gibson guitars. And even though earlier I had mentioned that while this guitar seems to be like a rounded off Explorer, that is certainly a feature that is unique to the Firebird and you won't find on the Explorer guitars. And then another design feature that's very slight that I really like about this guitar is these wings are actually kind of mounted at an angle. So this jut is a little bit shallower up here, and then it gets bigger and bigger as you get down here towards the bottom of the guitar. Now, other design features of this guitar is you get this really nice contour cut here. No doubt Gibson trying to compete with the Fender Stratocaster, which had the infamous belly carve right there. and that certainly does help out with comfort when you're playing, whether you're sitting or you're standing. Now, another thing that's a little bit deceptive about this guitar is actually how much routing is in it. So of course you've got your routing for your pickups there, but underneath this pick guard, you'll see you've got a channel that runs right along here parallel with the center block here that has the wiring for the switch, as well as the pickup wiring going down to the control cavity down there. And of course that was made just to make it easier to fish everything through. Now if you're curious about the thickness of the body, well, right here in the center block I'm getting about a 1.62 inches versus the wings where I'm getting somewhere closer to about a 1.33 inches. So in total that means the block is about a little more than a 1/4 inch thicker than these two wings. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the body does roll right into the neck, of course, because it's all one solid piece there, which makes it a really nice, smooth transition, especially if you're trying to get to these upper registers. This guitar also sports a rosewood fretboard. Now, moving up here to the top, we get to another point of contention amongst Firebird lovers. But according to Matt Kaler, this is one of their cost-cutting measures to make the Firebird just a little bit easier to produce. And what I'm talking about specifically is removing the stepped headstock. Now if you look at all the other previous Firebird 5 models, you'll see the stepped headstock that kind of matched what was going on here with the body juts. And it just kind of completed that look. Well, this headstock is pretty much borrowed from a very early Firebird 1 model where they also had a flat veneer on the top. And yeah, I wish it had the ornate stepped top as well, but it doesn't really bother me too much. I'll tell you what I am more bothered about is these tuners here, which I'll get to in a little bit. Now some measurements on this neck here. Well, for the nut I'm getting a 1.70. Moving on to the first fret, I get a 0.82, and down here on the 12th fret I get a 0.87, making this a pretty thin, slim taper neck all the way through. Now for the hardware, we'll start here at the bottom. We've got Gibson's oversized strap buttons there, my favorite strap buttons that Gibson makes, and honestly I wish they put them on every single guitar they had short of the Historic series. Just up from that, we get to our jack, nothing special there. And then moving on from there, we get to our aluminum stop bar and aluminum tune-o-matic bridge. Now, you might notice this is the newer Nashville style tune-o-matic where you've got the hex wrench adjustments if you're not getting enough grip there with your thumb on these thumb screws to adjust the height of your strings. Now moving up from there, we get to our metal pickup rings, which is something unique to the Firebird amongst most of the Gibson guitars. Moving up from there, we get to our medium jumbo frets. There's 22 of them on this guitar, pretty standard for most Gibsons these days. Underneath the truss rod cover, we've got our single action truss rod, of course, very common on every single Gibson. And then lastly, we get to our Grover Mini RodeLink tuners. Now, of course, these tuners are very different than what you would find traditionally on a Firebird, where you would have your banjo tuners. Again, this is another cost-cutting measure by Gibson because really I don't think they wanted to deal with that anymore. And honestly, it does kind of help solve the problem of neck dive, which is something that the Firebird is infamous for. Now, my biggest problem with these, of course, is they're so close together. I mean, you can see even when I grab this tuner, I'm already hitting this tuner. It's just, they're very tight. It's kind of like when I reviewed that Victory a few weeks back. It's just, they're just annoying, if I can be honest with you. I find them to be annoying. What I wish they did instead was put the Steinberger planetary tuners on here, kind of like they had on the Gibson Future Tribute models. They've got great tuning ratio, 40:1, and they're just so easy to adjust. Now, if you're curious about the tuning ratio on this guitar, well, these Grover Mini RodeLinks are 14:1, which is pretty common for most Gibsons these days. Now when it comes to the electronics on this guitar, well, let's just start here with the mini humbuckers. And yes, I did say that on purpose because these are actually not the Firebird pickups as you know and love. I did a little bit more research, and what's actually going on here is Gibson pretty much borrowed these pickups from the Firebird High Performance model. So what you've got here is the 495T pickup and the 495R pickup in the neck, and these are ceramic hot pickups. You see on the back there's nothing really too special. You've got a Firebird lead pickup and the Rhythm Firebird pickup. Nothing too descriptive, but check out these readings. For the bridge, I'm getting a very spicy 23.9. Up here in the neck, I'm getting a slightly gentler 15.61, and when I put them together, I'm getting a actually pretty spicy 9.45 for a middle position. That's why these pickups don't sound anything like that Firebird that I reviewed a few months back. Now let's pop open the back cavity and see what's going on back there. So, of course, you've got your pretty standard wiring, nothing too crazy here. You've got 500K pots all around, and the tiniest little capacitors in there, those little blue dots you see. Now for other materials, we'll start at the bottom and we'll work our way up. You've got just a little bit of felt here underneath these strap buttons. Then just up from there, we get to our black top hat knobs. These are very traditional to what's usually on a Firebird, going all the way back to 1963, complete with the silver discs in the middle that say volume and tone. Then moving up from there, we get to our 3-ply pickguard, white, black, white, with the Ray Dietrich designed Firebird logo here, which is always a very nice touch, I think, on Firebird. Something that really kind of distinguishes it from a lot of other Gibson guitars that don't have their own special logo. Then moving over from there, we get to spacers underneath these pickup rings. And that's actually a big improvement over the original design, because what happens is you get these pickups that are flat mounted to the body, and just like you find on the late 60s SGs with the giant pickguard, the pickups don't match the angle of the strings anymore. So these spacers really help to get them so they're running parallel with these strings. And then moving up from there, we get to one of the distinguishing factors of the Firebird 5 model, and that is our trapezoid inlays. These ones are acrylic, and then you've also got your binding on the side with your fret dot markers there. Moving up from that, we get to our Tectoid nut. This was before Gibson had adopted the Tusk nut, which seems they put on everything these days. And then lastly, we get to our single ply black truss rod cover there with the Gibson logo in gold. Now going back to the headstock design, you can see that this one's covered in a giant veneer here, which is certainly different than what you would find on the traditional stepped headstock design. And lastly, here on the backside, we've got a teeny tiny cavity cover that houses all the pots. Now, of course, like I said, I love Firebirds. I love the way they feel. They're actually very comfortable in your lap. This contour cut is perfect. The body itself isn't too thick, and so it's very easy to play. It's just my one pet peeve is that I'm always afraid that I'm going to hit something with this guitar because it's so long, and I know I'm not alone in that. I've actually had a friend come over, and he was interested in a Firebird. He asked if he could play it. He probably had it on for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and he was afraid he was going to bang it into something, and he was just so stressed about it. I'm not that precious about it, but I do think that it's a legitimate concern, and you know, I'm not alone. People say they're giant. Now that being said, it sits very well when you're playing, and it's actually very easy to play. And when you're standing, it's a little bit different of a story. Now the Firebird has always had somewhat of a history of being a neck diver, and of course, I'm sure that was increased when you had those giant banjo tuners on the headstock here. Now that we've got these Grover Mini Rotomatics, some of that's been taken care of, but let's just see how good or bad it is. It's like it wants to go, but it's not fully giving in like that. That would be bad. So if I set it here, the good thing is with minimal movement like that, it's very easy to play and keep it where it's at. You're not fighting it, wanting to dive down. I mean, of course, unless you're gonna sit there and wobble back and forth like this, I think you'll be okay. Another thing of note is the strap buttons are a little bit different on this model than what they traditionally were. So you used to have a strap button on the back side of the neck, but you also had one up here on what would be the top horn. Now I assume that one was always troublesome, so they just got rid of that one. And then the strap button on the bottom actually used to be centered with the block here, and you can see they've actually moved it to about 1 inch from the top of the jut here. So no doubt that's definitely got to have an effect on the neck dive. Now when it comes to the weight of this guitar, I'm actually getting a pretty light 7.69 pounds. So that's a really good weight for a non-weight relieved guitar that is just ginormous. Now for the sound test, I'm going to mess around with a bunch of different settings here, and I'll mess with the tone and the volume, and I'll put all the settings on the side here so you can see just what I'm doing. And we're going to figure out just what these non-standard ceramic mini humbucker Firebird pickups sound like. Well, that is my review of the last of the Gibson USA birds here, the 2019 Gibson Firebird in Cardinal Red. Like I've said a number of times throughout this video, one of my favorite guitars. I actually do like the way it sounds, but I do admit that the pickups are quite a bit harsher than the traditional Firebird pickups. I didn't even really understand how magical Firebird pickups were until I played the Epiphone that had the Gibson reissue Firebird pickups. If Gibson does ever reissue this guitar, I can only imagine they're going to charge what they're charging for like the new Victory, probably $2,500 or $3,000 maybe. But who knows, you know, if they're making all these changes to the guitar, are they still going to keep it a neck through design, or are they going to go with the non-reverse Firebird, which is just a set neck? I mean, that would be sacrilegious, right? They couldn't do that, could they? Could they? Anyway, if you have any comments or questions, as always, please leave them below, and if I have anything relevant to say, I always try to respond. If you did like this video, please click the like button. If you like content like this, please consider clicking the subscribe button. It certainly encourages me to make more videos like this. I appreciate you guys taking your time to watch this video, and I will talk to you next time.